So really a pleasure to be here. I was here last year when you were working on a piece. Was it with John? I just don't have my glasses on, but that's, yeah. So really nice to be here. What I'm going to do is kind of a smorgasbord today of talking about dance and disability. This is something Sabatino and I have been doing since 1994, so 20 years. And we're going to explain our history a little bit and our background because, quite frankly, people always ask, how did you get from there to this? And how did that work? And I think for a lot of you, since I know now that everyone in the room is not a dance major or a dance minor, the whole idea of expressing what dance and disability can do for us, to be clear for you, what it means to you as a person, not necessarily as a dancer. And I think that's really different. Last night we had an audience that was primarily dancers. I generally speak, I teach an art form, which is dance appreciation to 130 students a semester. So in general, they are not dance majors. How many of you are dance people, dance folk, whatever that means? I mean, you're all dance people because you're doing something, and all artists. So I would like to, since I didn't know it was going to be quite that diverse of a population, and I love that, I would like to address it in that way. So the first thing I want to talk about, and just up here, pictures 1,000 words. This is from a workshop that we teach every summer. I'll be actually showing you a clip of that. But you can see it's a fully integrated workshop, and the whole idea that we talk about is how do we address a really fair and equitable dance class when you have stand-up and what we call stand-up and sit-down dancers. Matter of fact, while we're here, Marcy, would you raise your hand? Here's one of our professional sit-down dancers. This is Marcy Ryan over in the corner. Welcome, Marcy. Marcy's danced with us for many, many years, starting back in 1996 to 2001 as a professional dancer. Traveled around the country with us. We did lots of gigs and main stage concerts and a lot of outreach programs. And Sabatino and Loretta were able to get together and actually put together a small study for you, because I can talk about it, or we can talk about it till the day is long, but to show it. Do you want to come in over here for a second, and then I'll let you talk about your dance section? The topic, artistic versus therapeutic, I have kind of two bylines, and I'll explain that. One is, Sabatino and I had a very traditional background in dance, and we met at University of Michigan back in 1977, 1800s, I don't know, long, long time ago. And we did our graduate work together. And we were really focused on being dance artists. That's what we wanted to be, and choreographers. We were not interested in kind of going outside of that. I call it being the soldier of the dance. We wanted to come to New York and we wanted to dance. And even Sabatino, who went on to be a choreographer of some means for many, many years now, at that point was really focused on dancing. So when we started to work with an integrated population, one of the first things we said is, we're not therapists. Dance therapy and dance psychotherapy are their own very specific fields, like occupational therapy, music therapy, recreational therapy. These are studied areas. And we said, we're just artists who know our art, and we know our technique, and we understand what that does for people in general. How many of you are taking dance class? You have a ballet class? Here are they? They're here also. So just the wellness, the feeling good about taking dance or making art or making music. So it's not about a versus in a contentious kind of way. It just means we're not therapists. We don't pretend to be therapists. Over the years, we worked very closely with the Cleveland Clinic, which is known for its extensive work not only in science, but in wellness. And we had a children's program in the Children's Rehab Hospital for years. That was a very specific type of work. And we worked with therapists. We worked with recreational therapists, occupational therapists, and physical. How many of you have ever had physical therapy of any sort? So recovery, I mean, it's kind of in general, any kind of therapy. So we work with them very closely, but that is not the point of departure we come from, and nor is that area of our expertise, and we never want to confuse that for people. The second one, the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, is just simply, and I'm going to talk very briefly about the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, which changed everything in people being more sensitive and more aware of people with disabilities, and people with disabilities who had never been part of mainstream programs, who had never been a part of public school programs, who generally weren't seen in the mall. They were either kept at home, that was kind of classic, or they were institutionalized. And so they were not necessarily developmentally delayed, but they became socially delayed, and therefore developmentally delayed. So what I talk about is, yes, we want the ramps to get in. I want Marcy to get in this building. I want her to dance for you today. And how is she going to get in this building if there isn't a ramp and an accessible entrance? That's very important. But it's also addressing the spirit of the law, meaning how do we really look at including people who have been left out, who have not been acknowledged, or who have been marginalized. And so that, thus, the second byline of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law is truly we started doing it out of the fact that we were so struck by the lack of generosity of our art form, dance, to allow other people in. Partially that's based on the fact that it's the ideal body and perfection. That's what dancers work for. I don't know anyone who has that, but that's some kind of weird standard that we set for ourselves, which makes our art form very, very difficult. And because this is our vessel, this is it. I mean, this is all we need to make a dance. We don't need really anything else. And that makes it very, very personal. And so again, it's about perfection of the personal. And you have to look at the definition, you know, of what is beauty and what is perfection. And that's how we began kind of exploring this. Do you want to say anything at this point? You're welcome to.
Well, when we talk about accessibility, we're also talking about universal design, where not a ramp is not in a curb cut is not only for a wheelchair user, but also for grandma, also for somebody with a stroller, somebody with a cane, and so on. So we're talking about access for everyone, and we will all have, hopefully not, some kind of disability in our life or temporary disability. So it's important to understand how to make design so that it's available to anyone, to everyone. Just like the civil rights, that kind of.
Well, and I will actually get to that, what the ADA is. But I think that's a really good point. It's also, if it doesn't happen to you, hopefully it's only temporarily, but it will happen because of the longevity of life, the percentage of that going up, and medical advances where people are living longer, so that's the good news. The bad news is that there's a ratio of more opportunity, if you will, to injure yourself or to have some kind of compromise in the body. So it's kind of looking at, instead of actually the word disability, but what are the levels of ability? And it's not to be naive about it, but disability has a lot of bad connotations. But so all of us will have varying disabilities probably at some point in our life if we haven't already. So people, one of the biggest questions they ask us is, how did you go from what you did to what you did? So that's us when we were both young and had hair. And we were, on the left-hand side, we were with a woman named Mae O'Donnell. Mae O'Donnell came out of a woman named Martha Graham, so we kind of have this very traditional legacy. And again, we came to New York, we danced for many years, it was just wonderful, professional dancers. Didn't make a lot of money, but we loved what we did. And it was in, I don't know, so what year? 1992. We moved to New York in 1979. In 1992, we were part of a big festival in New York City at Riverside Church, if you've ever heard of Riverside. It used to have a theater that was primarily used for dance. There wasn't a lot of dance theaters that weren't either so huge we couldn't afford them, or they were so tiny they didn't facilitate to have a real concert. And so Riverside had this festival, and Sabatino had two pieces chosen to represent New York City as male choreographers from around the country. And so we went there to perform. We performed there many times, and we walked in the theater, this theater we knew so well, and there was a woman on stage in a wheelchair, and there was a man standing up. And we immediately assumed that we were in the wrong place. And we knew we weren't, but we looked at each other and we said, there must be a conference or something. We walked in on something very personal. And before we could walk out the door, the lights went down. Of course, you then, therefore, cannot open the theater door because that's going to ruin the lights. It's called spill. It's going to spill light on stage. So we sat down and, oh my God, they started dancing. And we had no idea. And it was, again, a sit-down woman dancer and a stand-up male dancer. And we were, at that point in our lives, we were, I don't know, 38, 39. I mean, we'd been in dance now a long time. We lived in New York a long time, and we had thought, I wouldn't say we thought we knew it all, but we kind of thought we'd seen it all in terms of different art forms and the way dance was addressed, and the way contemporary music and the collaboration and all of those things. And we were completely stunned. And it was so beautiful to both of us immediately. I mean, it just so rich in its texture. What a sit-down dancer could do in a wheelchair, was glide in a way that we can only dream of. Those of us that use legs were actually hampered by steps. Steps get in the way. And there was a sense of like ice skating. There was that sense of capturing that glide and dynamic. Their partnering work was stunning. I had never seen partnering because the wheelchair in and of itself is like another dancer. So you're dancing with two dancers. And that dancer who is sitting in the wheelchair, also dancing, is controlling this other dancer. And if you've ever danced before, you know that your hair can become another dancer. Other things, your shoes you're wearing, your costume, they can either get in the way or you really have to learn how to technically handle them. And it was incredibly eye-opening for us to watch them partnering. Also, the relationship of a wheelchair, and I mentioned my mother was in a wheelchair, a terrible brain disease called PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy. So I was in a family later, after we started doing this, interestingly enough. This was the relationship to a wheelchair. I'm the stand-up, I stand behind. We never have eye-to-eye contact. We certainly very rarely have hand-to-hand contact, you know, holding hands, walking. So this relationship was so emblazoned in me. And when I saw these two people partnering each other with tenderness and acknowledgement and equal partner, I was really captured. And it took us 2 years. We had good jobs. We had finally had an apartment that didn't have a bathtub and a kitchen and a toilet in the hallway, which is how we lived in the East Village for many years. By then we had 2 babies. We have a daughter and a son. Well, we had our son at that point, almost had our daughter. And we were so captivated by this that they eventually talked us into moving to Cleveland, which, by the way, I was born in Detroit. I'm a Motown girl. You don't tell them you're going to Cleveland. This is not a place you go. And my family's like, what's in Cleveland? What could possibly be in Cleveland? And what was in Cleveland was a Cleveland Ballet, which was run by a very well-known artistic director, who started an outreach program and decided that he wanted to hire this woman in a wheelchair who had her own company to do all their outreach programs. And so eventually they coerced us, and we packed up 2 babies and a household and a cat, and we moved to Cleveland, Ohio 20 years ago. We started working with Mary Ruth Fletcher, who started the company. We did that for 9 years, so we're no longer part of that company, but for 9 years we worked in that capacity. And Sabatino did the majority of the choreography, and I did the majority of kind of teaching with children and administration, and then we both still were dancing. First year we did 120 performances of outreach and 3 main stage concerts. The second year we did 170 outreach concerts or performances and 22 main stage concerts. That's a lot. And yet we felt like we had so much of this new possibility to work with. So that is actually us later on in the company over there. So truly taking what we knew traditionally and moving it to another area in our life. It changed us. It changed us a lot. And I'll let you talk about what it changed for you in terms of you as a teacher and as a dancer.
Well, we are, like Barbara said, we are limited to 2 legs. And the wheelchair glide affords a whole different area of possibilities. And that's the way I'd like to look at it, actually, in choreography. It's not necessarily disabilities, because Marcy has a lot of ability. So I view it as, what are the possibilities? And you dig deeper in terms of creating work and more honest kind of work. What I mean by that is not necessarily that work is dishonest, but the purity of choreography and poetry in motion. It allowed me to work in a deeper way, and I was able to also train the dancers in a way that they had never had training before, because no one was teaching classes to train potential dancers. They didn't even think that they could be dancers. So it was opening up many layers, including accessibility of on stage. In other words, we could get into the theater, but not necessarily get on stage, because there was no ramp to get backstage. Okay? So we did a lot of work that way too in our 175 performances a year, in which we were able to help people around the country, school children as well as main stage concerts.
I think we also learned when we were on the road. I mean, I remember having to take the sit-down dancers had to go into the fireman's house in order to use a restroom, because there was no restroom in the theater that was accessible. Now, a lot of things have changed. But still, back of house hasn't necessarily changed. Mirrors that were low enough so our dancers could actually put their makeup on were not low enough in the bathrooms for them to do that backstage. So front of house, as you probably all well know, accessibility, we have front of house wheelchair seating now in baseball stadiums and concert stadiums. But we didn't see that in theaters. And we were really struck by that was, and we're still working on it in terms of the country understanding that. Let me do a little more brief history and then we'll go on from here. So the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 was one of the last civil rights acts that have come into this country. Prior to that, we had the very important, as you know, 1965 Civil Rights Act on racial discrimination. And it changed our country. We're still working on it. We're still not all good at it. We still go backwards. But it changed us. Any of us that lived prior to that time, it was a very different world. Again, still working on the idea of equal opportunity. So ADA, as it was called, was a Civil Rights Act. And it was about the fact, we'd already addressed women's rights. We've gone into women's voting way back when. But also women's equality in the workplace, that had been addressed in the 70s. But still, people with disabilities were completely marginalized. And they were the least seen disability, is what they talked about. And so the Civil Rights Act was about affording equal opportunity, appropriate adaptations, like we talked about how to get in the room, how to use a bathroom. We also looked, this is where he talked about universal access design. There are architectures, many architects now that work in universal access design. And that's very specifically what they work for, is to make buildings accessible. And again, I can already see in some of your eyes, it doesn't mean anything to you. It will mean so much to you when you break a leg, let alone if you're with a loved one who needs to be part of and included in. I hope, again, that doesn't necessarily happen, but I can predict the future, and for most of us, the percentage is there. So we want to have these things in place for the good of the whole community. You also are going to meet people who are people with disabilities who are fabulous, and you would never meet them if they aren't allowed in the room. So this is such an important aspect, the universal aspect of it. Of course, we know sign interpretation. Matter of fact, we'll teach you a little bit of sign language because we work with sign interpreters all the time. And how close to dance can you get? But with the use of American Sign Language is what we use. Audio description we used in all our theaters because we did have a lot of our constituents and fan base were visually impaired or completely blind. And so we had people who were professional audio describers who would describe what was going on, which I don't know if you can imagine how difficult it is to tell what's going on stage and still leave some mystery to it, because otherwise you just kind of spoon feed it and it's not very interesting in terms of art. So a real area of art form in terms of audio description. And of course Braille, it's on in every elevator, it's on the top of your McDonald's cup saying it's hot. We see it in so many more places now that we don't even actually recognize that it's there. How many of you felt the Braille on the top of your McDonald's or any coffee cup? And next time you have one, feel it. There is Braille talking to you on that. And again, in every elevator for safety. So all of these accommodations. The designated parking sticker was one of the biggest things that came out of ADA that we're probably the most aware of, handicap parking. Big ticket if you park it in the wrong area, right? This was huge because, again, people were starting to get out and about and actually Marcy drives were driving. And that had never been done before, but they couldn't also easily be in the back of a snowy parking lot and actually have a light to get into the grocery store. So the parking sticker came along, which has a little bit of, leads into this very next slide, handicapped. Handicapped is not a word that wants to be used by the disabled community at all. It means that in the old days, that many people who had a disability could not work. Nobody would hire them, so they were on the street and they used their hat to beg. They were handy with their cap, so they would put their cap out and they would put money in. I'm sure we all live close enough to areas where we've seen people on the streets. A lot of our vets would fall under this category of having to beg. So we're doing better. We still need to work on it. But weirdly enough, handicapped is still on our parking spots and our parking stickers, and this hasn't helped us get rid of that word. And it's not just me. This is the advocacy of everybody. It's really a negative or a pejorative word to say handicapped. So just in terms of being aware of that. And it still crops up with people. It's very interesting. Even within the community of people with disabilities will sometimes still use that word. The older generation will use that. So I think of it like Negro. You know, words that were appropriate in a spirit of time are not appropriate anymore. They're just wrong, and it came from sensitivity and awareness. So we just need to change the darn stickers, because otherwise people still utilize that word because it's out there related to our disabled community. It's people with disability versus a disabled person. They just often ask that you don't lead with disabled, because they're a person before they're someone with a disability. So I think that's, even though we often use adjectives to describe people, that's something that the community has talked about. And it goes much further than that. Sometimes there's very strong advocacy against even using disability, but different abilities, all abilities, and so forth. But it's kind of understanding that. People with disabilities or the disabled community is still often used as a politically correct term. It's always changing, so I'm always having to be comfortable and aware when I teach my students, 20 years in this field, that that's not the word to use anymore. And other really insensitive language. And I'm going to start with the R word. Kill it. Get rid of the R word, get rid of the N word, and then we'll all be at least starting to be more sensitive. The word retarded has become such a part of everyday vernacular that I hear people my age using, oh, that's so retarded. That is so negative. And we work with groups of students, 15 years they've studied with Sabatino and I, and even when he's out here, I still have them, and then all through the summer we co-teach. Seniors who were categorized as retarded. First of all, most of them, I think, really were institutionalized because they maybe spoke a little differently or funny, or their families thought that because their eye was strange, and they were put in institutions. They're all like 60 to 90 years old. So, sadly enough, they were categorized as retarded, and these are wonderful, generous, fabulous people who show up every Thursday to dance, and they're people. And as he says about Warren may have the cognitive ability of, say, a 4 or 5-year-old, but he's had 70 years of experience as a human being. And so how do you balance that and how you talk? So I have a real mission about to be more aware when you throw that word around, that it really is saying something about a community of people who have already been shunned and categorized, and who weren't born with some of the gifts and the intelligences and the other opportunities that we were. So much like the N word, it needs to go away and it needs to be addressed. So with young people, just think of it, there's a lot of words in the English language and many other languages. Find another word if you could. So we're looking at people being less, and I don't think people mean to be offensive about it. That's what's even sadder. I think we're just like so used to it. Let's not be so used to it. Let's not get used to it any more than a lot of other words you would no longer hear in an appropriate setting. And then the very last thing is, when in doubt, just be aware and choose sensitive language anyway. It makes us better people. So we talk about this because after traveling so many years, not only on tour in many places, and in Europe, which was not easy at all in terms of navigating old streets and the way people think, but also that at times people assumed that my mother or Marcy could not understand what they were saying. And so they would talk to me about Marcy. Would she like a drink? Would she like to, do you think she would like to sit in this chair? And I know that sometimes there are people that cognitively cannot answer for themselves, but to start with the assumption, and then Marcy would speak very articulately and say, I'm really okay, you can ask me directly. And she was never rude about it, so it's, educate, not humiliate. But it's an awareness. Or speaking louder to someone when they're older, assuming that everyone can't hear. We do it every day. We all do that. We all kind of make assumptions, but kind of an important thing. So the very last thing I'm going to do, dance responded to the ADA. Dance responded big time. Not in a super formal way, but dancers, all of a sudden, they could possibly go to a studio and go take a movement class. So it challenged the idea of who could be the artist. It was one thing to come and take class. Could you actually become a professional dancer? That was a whole different thing. Would anyone hire you? So it's one thing to do it for therapy. It's another thing to do it because it's fun, which is fine and okay too. But what about that powerful contributor to the art form? But they happen to be an opera singer that is in Appalachia and nobody's going to ever hear them because they didn't have that opportunity. So it really challenged people who could be the artist. By the way, a lot of people still don't believe that somebody with a disability should be a professional dancer. I want to put that right out there. There's been critics that would not come see us because they didn't believe it, and I guess that's okay. I'm sorry for that. I think it's their loss more than ours, because I think there's more people. I know, shake my head, there's more people. And again, I always go back to any time when someone was not allowed to do something because of something of color of your skin, how tall you were, where you were born. Those are the things. Religion. So it really harkens back to kind of just understanding that it's about us having a democratic way of looking at our art form and our people and the people around us. Challenge, I already said, the definition of beauty and perfection. We spend all our day looking in a mirror. This is a really challenging field as it is. It's really taken a long time for us to figure out, to really excavate and find the comfort and the beauty inside versus always dealing with the outside. And with dance, that's tough because we're always trying to push for that beautiful leg, that beautiful technique. But there's more to it. There's more substance, and that's true in any discipline. I forget just talking about art, in any discipline. Changing methods and vocabulary. We had to start finding training programs, and we made them up because we didn't know what we were doing for sure, but we knew it was important. And finally, the question is, what is equity? And I think through all our years and whatever we've come across, equity was only the chance to try. After that, it's in your hands to do, and your teachers, to do the right thing to help you. But equity is giving people a chance. Giving people a chance to get an education. How many wheelchairs did you see in the colleges years ago? Not many. You still don't see as many as you should. How many chances do you get for so many other aspects of your life? And so we're kind of looking at how to define equity. The reverse side of that is when we first started working in Cleveland and we had one or two people come in and take a class, they thought they could be in our company and go on stage and on main stage. And it doesn't mean that everybody who's in a wheelchair should be a professional dancer. They may not have all the things that there's talent, there's discipline, there's passion, there's that little magic that we all know of anything that we love. And so that was a real challenge for us to tell families sometimes they're not ready yet. They're not ready to be on their stage. Equity is learning how to give the opportunity and to try, but equity is not about just opening all the doors. It swings too far the other way, and it diminishes the discipline, and it diminishes those that have worked hard on it. So we had lots of little battles along the way to fight quietly. And the last thing I'll put up, there's many integrated companies. That's Sabatino, and that's actually really him doing that pose on his elbow. It's kind of an awesome, there was no photoshopping when this was taken. Well, I guess there was on some level, but we didn't have enough money to do that. This is a wheelchair dancer, Dave Now, who danced with us, who father, military guy, fabulous man, who was in a car accident, hit a deer, flipped his car, C5, cervical 5, very high up. If you know Christopher Reeve, the actor, some of you how many of you know who Christopher Reeve is? So again, the Superman, he played Superman, he was in a horse accident, and C3, which is why he couldn't breathe. Dave was C5, so he could breathe on his own, but his center of weight, he could only feel from here down. You can imagine there's no balance. I mean, picture trying to find that balance while you're sitting down. So people who have that kind of high quadriplegic, high injury, cannot lift their arms because their center of balance is off. So if you've never, how many of you dealt with anybody who was a quadriplegic as a friend? So you know that balance issues are huge because the center of gravity is up here. And the doctor said to Dave, you'll never be able to lift both your arms at once, and you'll never be able to lift your arms any higher than off the lap, because he'd have to bring it back for balance. That's Dave on the side tilt with the arms in the air. He was probably mid-50s by this point that he's doing this. And so his joke became that the doctors would say, but you can't do that. And he'd say, I know, I can't do this. You're absolutely right. And no scientist ever studied us, so we don't know exactly what happened, but we know that Christopher Reeve was really on it, and many of the scientists, of course, that there are neural highways that we can remake in our brain, or we can make new ones. And clearly Dave made new ones. And not only could he do it, even in that photo, you can just see, he did it in an artful and rhythmic way. And that meant he could be on count with the rest of us, and it just changed. And he was a gorgeous dancer, and I know Marcy danced with him for many years as well. A beautiful dancer. He had no grip in his hands, and yet people would see us partnering and would assume that he had full grip, but it was how we worked with the grip we had learned, so that you never saw any kind of sense of unequal partnering or a weakness. but finding a way to do it so that when you pull Dave, he could have a full partnering release or grab. So it was kind of spending years doing this, and I wish somebody had really monitored us, because it would be really nice to have passed on that information from a scientific point of view. Last thing before I think do a little demonstration. This is a question we get asked all the time, so I'm going to answer it for you. Yes, there are many professional companies out there. There are now many programs for people with disabilities, integrated programs, I call them, so that you're working together. And no longer we're being stuffed in a class inappropriate, where I'm in a class with teaching a 3-year-old and a 70-year-old because they were supposedly developmentally disabled. That just doesn't work. So just like your college, you got to be at a level. You got to be at the right place, because it feels really inappropriate to be in the wrong class. Just because you fit in a category. And I think we've all probably been in those settings in some place in our life, and it's just wrong. It doesn't work. So these companies, including Let's Dance, started here in New York, then went to Ohio and came back to New York, are companies that have been around a long, long, long time. There are many more in there, but I think that's just important, because I think people think, we're not the end-all, be-all. By the way, we didn't discover it. Dance has been out there for years. We just kind of found ourselves in a new way of using vocabulary. So on that, I thought maybe it would be a good time for you to do a little bit of demonstration with Marcy.
I'd like you to meet Marcy Ryan. And Marcy, we met up in 94, 5, 6, during Lincoln's time. And she came to us in a workshop setting, and then stayed forever and became a professional dancer and toured with us forever, did thousands of performances. And we are recently coming back together again and working together, and that's how we come to be here. And we talk a little bit about the chair and what it's like for you.
Sure. This is a sporty kind of model, and I think that's very important. Like Barbara was talking about, a lot of wheelchairs have the push handles, and if you're going to be doing a dance or something more sporty, you don't really want all that in the way, unless you need it. Or like Dave with his high injury, he had a low model, but he would just strap himself in, still giving himself, room to move around. This chair is actually my tennis chair. It was gifted to me by the Challenge Athletes Foundation. They're very generous. If you have any interest in sports at all, and you're disabled, and you meet certain economic guidelines, they pretty much gift you some good material here. This one's made out of aluminum. It's very light. Titanium is actually lighter, and that's what my everyday chair is made out of. But this one, like I said, was a gift, and this is the beautiful chair that they wanted to buy for me. It's made by the Quickie Company. The camber. It's a tilt of the wheel,
right.
And in this particular chair, it makes it very easy to spin with very little effort, and that's very helpful on the tennis court to reach those little yellow balls.
But if you notice, she's sitting on a platform and is able to maintain that axis rather than just flying off at that speed. So that's also the technical part of the dancer.
Exactly.
Part of the wheelchair.
And we decided to try using this tennis chair in our new work, which is new for us because it has an anti-tipper in the back. Meaning it's still scary for me to lean back because I'm still afraid I'm gonna fall. But I'm not gonna fall. Though in that chair I would fall, and that's the one I'm more used to working in.
And so, but that chair allows, Marcy, we'll show you later on, allows her to do what's called front end work, to pick up the front end, to stop quickly, and also to spin at different times. Can we try that?
With that chair?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Can that young man bring it over?
My little friend over there is my new friend. He's my new buddy with the wheels.
He's got dance shoes on.
College kids get younger every week.
It's some front end work. I mean, that allows Marcy to stop quickly and also spin wonderfully. And yeah, so you can steer me as well. She likes to do that. That's her everyday chair, right? Yeah. I can't do that. I hope to learn someday.
And it had a lot to do with us when we were choreographing. That first of all, she could do pirouettes. You know, we do pirouettes on one leg. That we could not only insinuate it. Sometimes we have to insinuate. She could do it. So it really. And there you go. So you just saw the reality You just saw the reality of working in a studio, and of course, where Marcy is very careful and has learned how to be on the floor.
And knows how to fall.
And knows how to fall. How many dancers we learn how to fall because we're going to do it at some point.
Who's never fallen before?
Yeah. No.
I asked that once to a high school class, and there were people.
Oh, raise their hand.
And also, this has quick release wheels, like you can just take it off and put it back on. But you have to make sure it clicks back in because the wheel will go away by itself. I'd like you also to re-meet Loretta. We've been working on a small phrase. Let's come back here. Just some things that we've been working on. We're doing some small phrases that we want to share with you. And some of the things that we encountered, for example, like a skater, you can lean and suggest going around a curve. If I pulled Marcy straight back, and then she could lean towards her right, she could probably turn and come back to me-ish. She can also do that on her own. Doesn't need my help because she's an independent woman. Loretta, we were working on some material partnering ideas, weight transfer, bearing weight, weight resistance. So, before you start, ladies, imagine, Barbara talked about sign language. If you can't hear the material, but what if you couldn't see what was on stage? How would you describe what's going on? And who has the authority and the finesse and the poetry to choose the right words about something abstract? It's one thing to relate the story of Macbeth, let's say, or row, row, row your boat. But how do you describe something? Can you partner up real quick? Good. Find somebody. Go ahead. Partner up. Find somebody. Make a friend. Somebody you've never seen before. Hey. Hurry. 5, 4, 3. No, you don't have to stand up. I would have used words like stand up.
Yeah, but Sabatino, they're so at the ready as dancers.
I know.
I love
Here's
them.
what I want to do. A small experiment. Do you have a partner? Yeah, okay. One person choose to close your eyes. And the other person is going to describe what these ladies are going to do, which will last about 15 seconds. Is that okay? And then we'll rehearse and talk about the experience. So, as we say in theater, sotto voce, that means under your breath. So we can all hear what we're going to do, okay? So one person is close the eyes, and the other person describe his action. Please.
Please participate, yeah, please.
It's about a broader experience. And go. Describe.
I really have a picture of her. She's kind of on the wheelchair now too. She's kind of and she gets a picture and she's ridiculous.
And thank you.
Face to face.
Good. Right away, reverse. Right away, reverse. Don't look at it. One more time.
Wait, we have to reverse too?
No, you close your
And here we go.
Yeah. Water spinning.
And hold. Just exchange together for about 10 seconds. Go ahead. Experiences? Actually, let's share it together. Reflection. Reflection is important because we can learn things, new things. We can also reaffirm, in other words, yes, gravity is still here. That's so great. Reaffirmation. We learn that way, or new things, like watching our young dancer. What did you experience? Did you understand what your friend was explaining?
Did you find it hard to find
Yes.
the words to explain it?
Yeah.
He was very bad at describing.
Yeah.
Okay, we can get back.
There's honesty to it.
Anyone else?
Something I was just saying, did you find it hard to find the words? Because I think it's, all of a sudden you find you don't have the words to get the feeling out, and then you just start describing movement, but then movement isn't really just dance, because that could be exercise or athlete. I heard some really good things over here. I could hear a little bit of what was going on.
Anyone?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, you can describe the motions. You can say, you know, they're spinning or they're twirling, but it's hard to say it elegantly enough for them to understand how beautiful the motions actually are.
Wouldn't you also agree, like when they go to caress the face, there's a real feeling in it? That, like,
Yeah, and I mean,
did you
you
fit
can
the
say
feeling
they're
in?
caressing the face without actually touching, but it's like, you know, how do you really explain it?
And the very word caress suggests so many things.
Exactly.
The other thing I want to appeal to our musician here, that would be the greatest score for a piece like this, to just have this kind of beautiful undercurve. It's almost like water when you're talking, because I can only hear little bits and pieces of words, and just small words will come out. So I see that as a collaboration in the future, because it was really beautiful to listen to.
That murmur was wonderful. Ashley, did you have something? Rudimentary. Yeah, it's hard to get poetry in there.
She could see movement, but she couldn't see direction. Is that what you just said?
Thank you. We're working on a dance. We have a small study. We just put it together like 10 minutes ago. So we'd like to just share what we're working on and hope to share it in a broader way in the future. And I think, Barbara, you have a sound for
Yeah,
us.
I'll just layer something.
We don't know what it is. This is like John Cage, movement and sound for the first time. sign language, we applaud like this. Can you try that?
Come on, everybody, it's a gift to learn a second language.
But Barbara and I have changed it, so we aim it at people. Go ahead, find somebody's eyes and applaud them, even though they don't want to be applauded.
We're not sure what that means.
We don't know what that
We're really
means.
not sure what that means.
It might be voodoo, I don't know.
So I want to say in watching this, because I know this is relatively new, it really is hard to partner and blend the weight and the glide of the wheelchair with the stop and starts and still have a sense of flow. And I watched them, and it really grew exponentially today as you go through it. So it really is all those nuances, whether you're, again, a musician, a visual artist, a dancer, whatever your discipline, an athlete, to know where you need to stop and start. And so I hope by showing that demonstration when you partnered, that you could really see more of the intricacies. That moment where you push Marcy and Loretta, you have to catch her on that other diagonal and reverse turns. It looks so simple, it's so not. And again, it's to the credit of 3 dancers that get what's going on and how to make that happen. So, thank you. Did you want to show a little bit more? I was going to go and show a little bit of film, and then we could come back.
And then do a Q&A.
So thank you for doing that, by the way. Yeah. Because my husband and I live 3 states away anymore, it's a little hard to collaborate as much as we used to, at least during the academic year. And so for me, it was such a gift to know that the 3 of them put their time in to present something live, because you can talk about it till the day is long, but when you see it happen, I think that it just incrementally moves up your understanding of like, well, what do they mean by wheelchair dance? And what do they mean by integrated dance? And I don't think anybody looked like any less of a dancer than anyone else out there, but it's hard to express that simply through talking and through photos. We do our best, but it's really is a challenge. So I appreciate that time. I'm going to move forward with this. Oh, let me pull this out. Bring this back. So well, let me move forward really quickly. Again, you saw a lot of what we talked about, that artistic versus therapy. I've already mentioned that. One thing I do want to touch on really quickly, professional versus recreational, that again, professional training comes in all different kinds of vocabulary, so it's just like different genres of music or art. So the whole idea, we use the May O'Donnell technique. If you study with my husband, I'm sure here at Modern Dance, you'll be introduced to the May O'Donnell technique. But there are many techniques and vocabularies. So it's very individual in terms of its development. And we also use improvisation and contact improvisation. A lot of partnering comes out of contact improvisation. Things go right and they become a happy accident, and then you set them and they become choreography. But we find that those have been so valuable for our students, particularly also our young students, who haven't been touched in a certain way partnering. And I think that's, if you've never partnered, it's a little scary thing to do. Anytime that you're kind of dealing with another physical human being and being able to be sensitive to that. So we have found that to be a real great tool. The other thing we teach our students is composition. It's a real part. Dance composition is an integral part of the modern dance field. It goes back to a woman named Martha Graham and her music director, Louis Horst, who said, just like music, composition is a necessary element to study because there are concepts and tools, and there's a sense of power to be able to create, whether you go on to be a choreographer or not, to be able to create a small study is a really gratifying and powerful means of contributing. So composition is part of all of our dance major programs in most of the universities to at least some level. And then the final one is repertory choreography, because God, you work so hard, you want to be able to show something and share that with people. It is just part of it. It's like practicing all day on anything and never sharing the final product or whatever the close to final product is. So we make sure of that with our students. But I also again mentioned seniors with disabilities. Our oldest student you danced a duet with was 91, and they danced together and they were beautiful. I just said you can have them. She was just so fabulous and so beautiful. And so she had been in a wheelchair for about 10 years, I think, and just had really dreamt of dancing with someone in some way. So we call that creative movement or recreational dance, and we do a lot of different things like the name game, just so that we get to know their names through movement. So this last part I want to show you, this is a workshop we teach every summer up in White Plains. We did it for 9 years in Cleveland, And then when we were no longer with Dancing Wheels and I was at Kent State and Sabatino was resurrecting for Let's Dance Again, we were invited back to New York, since we had lived out here for so many years, and to a very traditional studio up in White Plains, who said, hey, we want some of this. This is so interesting. Our young people want to be interns. So we teach every summer, and we have, again, a wide range of students, but the adults are all together, young adults through adults, and then we teach children with autism the second week. That's a real necessity to make that a separate workshop. It honors everybody in a much better way. And we have college students. So almost came last year, but we couldn't figure out the commute. Who was that?
Emily.
Yeah, I wrote you. Hi, it's me. We so hope that can work again in the future. And we do know the logistics of commuting. But we had students from Montclair State University, Kent State from Ohio, Eastern Michigan University from Michigan, Marymount Manhattan College, Sarah Lawrence College. It was just, the interns were from colleges all over, which is, by the way, they've all become their own good friends, so we would love to include Raritan. I was very sad that we couldn't make that work, perhaps this year. But we have all our students who've been coming it'll be 12 years this year for the adults, and I think 9 years for the children with autism. So what I want to do is show you some of that work through a film, because I think it's important to see a setting where it's not all dancers, since everybody in this room is not all dancers, specifically to career. And how does this really work, and what does it do for people? What we found is it gave them wellness and physical body, it gave them a sense of community to dance together, and it gave them a sense of power. And I do know this, anytime you create anything and share it, it's not power to overpower, but to empower. And so I want to show you this film. So again, this was a documentary shot in 2004, which we used kind of for grant purposes and educational purposes. What I'd like you to look at is the older gentleman who's one of the dancers. He looked very atypical to the group, and he was. He was an older gentleman who had a stroke the prior year, and he essentially hated physical therapy. He was not responding to physical therapy at all. And he saw this thing about dance, and he said to his wife, I would really rather go dance than physical therapy, which I found fascinating, and we'll add even more interesting facts to that after we show this. But so his name is Bill. Now I want you to watch the other day. You're going to recognize a few dancers in there and that you've met today and so forth. But what's so fascinating about Bill is because he was new, I think actually the stroke was even less than a year. And his whole left side was compromised, particularly his left arm. And he said to us very clearly all week, I cannot use my left arm, it will not work. So we didn't push for that because we certainly believe that. He also said a few other things that he couldn't do, like walk backwards, and eventually we were doing a step that went backwards and he just did it. And his wife said he's not supposed to be able to do that, supposedly. And he was able to do it. So it's not claiming anything miraculous except that the will of intent when you want to do something that comes from your heart and not from what you have to do as a task is a very, very powerful message. And so please watch Bill. You will notice he does not go around in a circle because he could not at that point. He danced with us for 3 years. Eventually he could go around the circle, but he just wasn't quite ready yet. And you'll see an older woman in it who's dancing with my husband, who's actually his wife, and had not had a break from caregiving really in many, many months. And eventually we just kind of took them away from each other. They didn't realize it. And I was like, you go dance with my husband and I'll dance with your husband. And eventually you'll see her at a point, they do a close-up of her, and she's so involved in the dance, she's not worried about Bill, because she was always worried about Bill. So it's just kind of a full microcosm of what can happen in real life when you find yourself in a setting that's driven by passion or just community and not about having to do. So I hope, and again, normally I would just say just watch it just to see it. It's 16 minutes long, so there's a lot more before that. But I hope you could see Bill's intention and eventually not only was he holding, he lifted it himself, which again, we'd spent a week like this, and he just kept saying, can't use it. And we were like, that's okay, just use one arm. So again, I saw him processing. He was dancing with Kirsten. He was having a very good time actually dancing with Kirsten, who is a wonderful person who has, her little sister was born with a profound disability. And so she really had a wonderful understanding of being in an integrated workshop. but we did not see the film until 6 months after it was done, because you don't see it until it's edited and so forth. And the guy sent it to us, and we were like, oh my God, Bill is so busted. Oh my God, because he could. And he didn't even know it until he saw the film. So from that time forward, we had him for 2 more years. He not only used that left arm, he used that left arm all the time, because we could call him on it. And it was so wonderful. The postscript to our story is Bill died way too young. He passed away 3 years after that. And it was somewhere in our 2nd year, we found out that Bill was a very famous stunt car driver. And if you're, as in my age group, there used to be Firestone commercials for Firestone tires. And the stunt car driver, was kind of doing all the crazy things. And there was a car that would go like on 2 wheels and go down the alleyway and come out on the other side. And that was Bill. So Bill was this male athlete, from another time who wanted to come and take dance in order to rehabilitate. And we just found that whole story so fabulous. And his wife is an RTA worker and never thought she'd end up in a modern dance class, dancing with other people. So that was to show you kind of the power, if you will, of recreational dance, and recreational dance put together with integrity, and don't have to be a dancer to make it happen. And for us, whatever miracle had happened for us and for Bill, it really was out of the sense of feeling so good that he was able to find something that made him want to work like that. I didn't know if you wanted then to turn this over to any Q&A at all?
Yeah, we have five
5 minutes.
5 minutes or so.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to come out and... So does anybody have any questions? People were shy last night, and then we had to actually stop the Q&A. But questions for any one of us about it, or commentary? Anybody have any comments about it? Yes, Corey, is that right?
Yes.
I was listening.
Well, I don't want to cry, but it was
Thank you. You're making me cry. Thank you, because I assume these are tears of good tears. Yeah.
there's a lady at my church, and I was at a point where I didn't want to do anything. And she had recently had her foot taken out because of diabetes. And she was in a wheelchair and she was in the front row. Long story short, her blessing to our pastor was that she said, even though I can't really walk, but I'm going to walk today. She got out of her chair and walked all the way to her pastor. And this before I had danced for the pastor's birthday. And she really blessed me because I keep trying, despite anything that tries to take over you and make you feel debilitated. So thank you, because it was a blessing for her. She's not here right now, but it was even more of a blessing. So thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think it is, I can see, I watched you dance, you're clearly an artist. The whole idea of being a human being first and how that moves you. And one of the gifts that we have found is somebody asked us that, well, what has this done for you? And you would have the answer for, so we'll pass it to you, Marcy. What has this experience done for you,
I just feel enriched in my experiences about humanity, my art form, and people in general, and incredible work, like Corey is saying, honest work where people can come together as a community and a village, because we are a village. And actually that's one of our problems on this planet. We're not together, we're not a village. We're still trying to hang on to our properties and this and that. So this kind of work just is, well, to use your words, like going to church.
Marcy? I'd love to hear your...
I think the most major thing that being able to be in dance class and experience working with other dancers and teachers is that it allowed me to find a friendship with my body. It's very easy to be disassociated from your body, I believe, especially if you're disabled. And if your experience has been, unfortunately, a lot of medical interventions that are unpleasant, painful, humiliating. There's no fun in being in a body like that. But dancing, you can become a friend. Your soul can mend and become a friend to your body. And I think that's the primary gift that I remember
Marcy with us. She not only can dance, she can talk, you can talk. Thank you, that was beautifully put. Can we take one more? Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Just want to know if everybody what this is the future for all of you.
The future for all of it, for the big umbrella of integrated dance.
For your program, what you're doing.
Our program, our future is an odd future right now because it's now kind of half migrated back out of here. So what we're doing is really trying to grow these programs out here. Matter of fact, thank you, Loretta, for this invitation, because I think it's through meeting people and talking to them and listening to them that we can grow the. You used to say it's one audience member at a time. Modern dance ain't easy, and dance in itself is not easy. And to find a way to grow that, I think, is through demonstrations like this. So we're hoping that we can grow more programs up in White Plains, so nearby, and possibly more ongoing workshops and intensives that happen through colleges and universities. We're certainly trying that at Kent State University as well. And hopefully, Sabatino, a little bit more integrated performance like this. For Loretta, this was so wonderful that she came in and did this, because we need to grow that company again, so to speak, and get Marcy back out dancing again. I know we're at time, so Loretta, I don't know if you wanted to wrap it up or you want us to wrap it up.
I'd love you to wrap it up. I guess if there's, are there any other questions or comments?
Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's teach him a little bit about that. So thank you. Put your hand under your chin is Italian. So please put your hand under your chin. Everybody, please. Again, it's about including yourself and saying thank you.
Or thank you very much. Or under the chin.
Oh wait. Everybody, please. It's a gift to learn a second language, right? And you're welcome. And you're welcome doesn't have a specific place. I've been told all sorts of things like that, but to kind of underneath the heart. So you're welcome. So,
I've also seen it where you want to show the sensitive part of your hand. You see? So maybe spiral just a little bit and nod. You're welcome. So if we say thank you, you say, that was wonderful. Wonderful. Like babies do. Come on, use your arms or else we're going to take them.
yeah, you got them. Please use them.
Yeah.
And the last thing is, everyone, no one's invisible in here. Everybody put your hand, one arm or two. Put your hands on your shoulders. Take it a little ways out. So that's angel in sign language. Take it way up. Cross each other like swan lake. You look extraordinary. And let's go down slowly. Thank you very much.